if they're still here later, I mean, we're looking at maybe some potential fatalities.
Their hope is that we will come out and do something to women and children, and there's no way that we would ever do that. But what happens sometimes then is they come up, and a lot of the times the militant ones will disguise themselves in there, and the next thing we know, what we thought was going to be peaceful or prayerful, now they're coming for us.
It is our duty to fight for our freedom! It is our duty to win! It is our duty to win!
The protesters came from all over the country to fight the Dakota Access Pipeline. For many, this is a fight over clean water. For others, it's a fight against big oil and climate change. For the Standing Rock Sioux, it's a fight for control.
So the pipeline protest of 2016 was an interesting time for the North Dakota National Guard. We had about 400 soldiers and airmen on active duty, state active duty, preparing for one of the biggest protests in history, the biggest one in North Dakota history, and can be argued that it was the biggest one in U.S. history. It was a challenging time for us because we're used to fighting floods or fires or natural disasters. And this time it was a man-made crisis that we were up against. And we didn't really know what the time frame looked like. Early on in the protest, we had what we thought was an end state. We thought it'd be done in 2 weeks, and then another month, and then after about 2 months out there, we came to the realization that we didn't know exactly when this was going to end.
Initially, my role was as the Director of Emergency Services for the state of North Dakota. For the first couple weeks, we tried very hard to keep the National Guard out of it. This was a law enforcement issue, so we're trying to find a law enforcement solution. As time went on, just because of being a small state with about only 1,800 licensed peace officers in the entire state, it became apparent that we're going to have to call the Guard in to help law enforcement. So at that point, I served both as the Director of Emergency Services for the state of North Dakota and also as the Adjutant General with the Guardsmen actually supporting civil authorities. We established a unified command, and it did cause some tension. As the Adjutant General, because of the nature of the protest, a lot of the leaders of the protests were Native Americans. There is a history of the U.S. Army engaging with Native Americans on the plains in the northern United States. So it was a bad optic to have National Guard going up against a cause being led by Native Americans. And I say led because as the protests went on, there's probably less than 40% of the protesters were actually Native American. They had a legitimate concern about water quality, the impact on their people.
There's a level of respect that comes with wearing the uniform. And people look to those leaders in uniform, kind of as the go-to. And General Dorman, with the way he carries himself and his demeanor and the way he treats people, was basically the person that everybody turned to. The best things about those types of leaders is General Dorman is, I would say, a soldier. He would never ask anybody to do anything that he himself wouldn't do.
That was the infamous Backwater Bridge night. I think my phone rang around midnight or 1 in the morning. On that particular night, you kind of, again, understanding or having situational awareness, you know whether it's going to be a good day or a bad day. If they were trying to just get media attention, but if they were coming at you trying to break through your lines, then they'd have a different posture. I think they were trying to get the narrative out there that we were using excessive force. So we had them pinned down at this Backwater Bridge. There was a couple of vehicles we drove in there to try to stop the activities in October. They burnt those vehicles. But after that, we put in more reinforcements. It did, in fact, look like a combat zone. There's HESCO barriers, triple strand concertina. But this day, they were going to try to break through there. And they just kept coming at us. We had to call for more or less than lethal. And there was a young airman that was carrying boxes of CS gas and maybe beanbag rounds forward, and he wasn't keeping up with the demand, and he just grabbed me. I'm not sure if he knew who I was, and he said, "Can you help?" So I went back and grabbed a couple boxes and helped him out. And good on him for taking the initiative. He had a job to get done. He was shorthanded. When things would stop for a while and settle down, maybe I'd go down once or twice a week. But when the protests were very active, I'd be down there almost daily. It's just important for leaders to understand what's on the ground. Because I remember in October we had our big push, and protesters were on the pipeline right away, and the only way to continue construction was to push them about 3 miles to the south. And we're talking probably a couple, 300 people that were camped right on the construction site, and then hundreds, if not thousands more coming up to support them. So we worked the plan to push them. It was going to be slow and methodical, try to keep everybody safe. And they wanted Humvees, up-armored Humvees from the Guard. I said, no, I don't want them on the front lines because it looks like a military operation. So we agreed that we'd support, but we'd stay behind the front line, so to speak, and those Humvees would be used for officer safety. So if needed to help an officer in danger or to evacuate somebody out of there, we'd have the Humvees on hand. But on that day, I was down there, and law enforcement, it was very slow and methodical. The protesters were burning vehicles on the road. They were refusing to move. They were forcing officers to use less than lethal methods. And it just looked like it was not going to happen. There was not enough speed. There was not enough presence. So I authorized the Humvees to go forward. And part of this was they kept getting outflanked because we're out in the middle of the prairie here. And with those Humvees, they could move forward, have a stronger presence, and keep from getting outflanked. But had I not been on the ground, I probably would have said, well, no, we agreed that there would not be a military presence. Through this experience, I got to know probably over half the sheriffs in the state of North Dakota. I got to know a lot of the police chiefs. I got to know a lot of the officers. I got to know some of the key players in state government. So knowing those folks and then maintaining those relationships, because positions change, people change. When we took this whole of government approach, we got some whiz kids out of our information technology department that helped us build a website and communications tools we needed to get the message out. We're able to take a breath, figure out how do we get after this? How do we get our messages out there? Because we can't take on 10 or 20,000 trolls, but we can try to influence the message and how we go about doing that. For me, when this was going on, I'm like, you know what, I'm having a flashback because I've been to Kosovo twice. And in Kosovo, the #1 instrument of power was not the military. If things went well, if you were working the diplomatic piece, the information piece, the economic piece, understood the culture and was working that, hopefully you never had to send troops out, crowd riot control to deal with civil unrest. It was kind of the same here. If you utilize those other instruments of state power, maybe you could keep folks safe without direct engagements between law enforcement and the protesters.
Very thankful that nobody was injured, that everything went fairly smoothly. We had one little area in the middle of the camp that gave us a little bit of resistance, but most people went peacefully. The protesters disrespected the land tremendously. You can look at the garbage and the trash. Most of these tents are filled with rubbish and just collections of stuff, and most of it is unusable. And you can see where they abandoned cars. They built structures where they're not allowed to build structures, so we're going to have to remediate the land and make sure that the mitigation of this entire preserve here that is owned by the Corps is just completely redone. And it's just very sad to see people who say that they're here to protect the water and the land to do something like this to anybody's land.